Okay, so this seemed like this would be so much easier to just demonstrate than chat over. So FYI, this is a private video on purpose because I want to do this more formally and one thing at a time. So please don't share. All right, as you can see, very lightly, I've got these three shapes: a square, a circle, and a teardrop. Really quick, this is just me going through some satin stitch. I'm not going to fill all of these things up, but I want to do enough so that you can see the difference between this one and this one and this one and how they kind of lead into one another. So as you can see, I already have some. So this was a satin stitch. There's no outline, there's no padding. I got tired of doing it after a while. So you can see it kind of tapers down. And if you look at the back, right, the back looks about as almost as neat as the front. And that is something important, right? So this looks like this because this is how it's done. Then you've got this one. This is called a radial stitch. Now, I've seen people do this a number of ways. And the reality is it's dealer's choice. What I was taught was to do it a specific way that leads into this a lot better. And so what's important here is that there are ways to do things that probably work for very certain applications, and there are other ways to do the same thing that probably work better for different applications. And I know that doesn't sound like a super concise answer, but that is the answer. So you can't see this, but this started out as a circle. And we went outside to inside at 12. And then 3. And then 6. And then 9. And so I haven't filled out this last spot. But then what happened is this quadrant from 12 to 3 was cut in half. And then this one was cut in half. And then that one was cut in half. And so that's how it is not so sequential so much as starting here and then just going around, which is what a lot of radial looks like. And the reasoning given for not doing it in that fashion is that what happens is when you start to go around curves, sometimes it gets messy, sometimes it's difficult to keep it even. And then if you lay the threads too closely together, they'll bunch, and so you'll have this kind of lump. And generally speaking, that's not what you're trying to do. And then if you look at the back of this, you see it's not as neat as this is because you're going and filling in, but at the same time, it's not all over the place and like a hot mess like this is. So that's important. Go ahead and get that off my desk. So this one, the reason this was done so large, as you can see, there's a really big size difference here, is because this kind of satin stitch is really good for filling larger areas without making it super bulky. Like this is not layered, and it starts from this point and it goes out and then here, and then I split that piece and I split that piece, and then it's a little more haphazard because as you go along you just kind of fill in this place, and it's kind of like if you were coloring and you're doing like this, right, to color, only with thread. And that's a pretty good approximation of what it looks like. And then all of these stitches, you know, long and short is really uniform. This is not really uniform. And that's kind of the big difference is it uses longer stitches, right? There's a long stitch right here. And then I've got a shorter stitch right here. And then we've got another shorter stitch right here where they're layered over top of each other. And so it's like scribble coloring. So I've got my needle. This is a 5, by the way. This is some really big fabric, but also just FYI. I've gone ahead and taken out some of this thread. Random other things, you know, you may know, but just communicating what I was told was I used about a yard, and the way he separated this was to pinch at the top and separate a strand out, and pinching and continuing to just pull. And then and it was separated that way on purpose. And that is to not compromise the thread itself by unwinding it. A lot of people don't split it like that. So, and again, and this is just, you know, if you want to split it a different way, split it a different way. It's whatever. One of the reasonings he gave for doing it this way was that it doesn't compromise the twist of the thread, but it also helps the threads lay flatter, because in that little 6-strand configuration, right, they're twisted together versus laying flatter. And that is just one of those things that would matter when it comes to when you're trying to stitch and build texture. And then, of course, we just straighten that all out. And then I've got my 3 already. So that was another thing. So I'm using 3 threads. You could absolutely do this with more threads, but if you're using it with more threads, you're going to use less, right? Stitching to get the same surface area covered, because you've got a fatter piece of thread, which is just, that's how that works, right? And then I use a quilter's knot, also I think called a tailor's knot, to knot this instead of tying it, because it's just so much easier to do that. And I don't know, in case you haven't seen this for whatever reason. So the pointy end and the end of the thread, wrap 1, 2, 3. I like to wrap like somewhere between 3 and 5. Wrapping more than that, and you see it's all under there, but wrapping more than that becomes really messy and clunky. And so I don't love doing that. And this little guy got caught. And I just pulled it through, and so it's a nice little knot. Now, obviously, I'm going to see if I can move back. So I'm working around this. Now, if I were to end this, even before or after, that would do certain things. And one of the things that he did when he did the student stitches, obviously, you're going to work outside of the lines that you've drawn, so they're covered, right? And we always start at the bottom and always stop at the top. And it's just, you need to be consistent, whatever you're doing, whether you're starting at the side or the bottom or the top, right? It doesn't matter. And that's because that's how you get that nice finished look on the back. And I'm just going to do like 3 of these. Because I can like do 3 and not look like I don't know what I'm doing. I can't do much more than that. By the way, this is my first bit of satin stitch, like last night. And so I don't have tons of experience of doing satin stitch. And I think I managed to do a pretty good job. Okay, so right, we've got that. It's nice and it's neat and it's lined together. And if you flip it over, it's nice and it's neat and it's not, you know, all funky. And so that's what that looks like. And then I would just keep going. And then they instructed like how to fix. So if I had one going a little over here and had a gap, like this, for example, I'll show you what it looks like. And maybe, so instead of going here, maybe I went over a little too far, which absolutely happened last night. Okay, so that's not even. And their recommendation was, okay, so go back about where you were, right? Go back there. And then instead of going here, which is where you would go if you were starting a new line, you just go and fill that spot in. And there you go. Right, and it looks nice and neat, and you can't really tell. And if I continue doing this, another thing that they went over was forming a knot, like ending the thread. They like to do 3 little stitches right over top of each other to secure the thread, which I thought was an interesting and novel idea because I'm gonna have to knot it. And then it just secures it, and it's all done. Yay! I promise. I know, I've rambled for like 11 minutes. Okay, so there you go. And now I can snip, snip, and then go on to the next part. Okay. So pardon me while I knot again. Oops. And I mumble to my stuff when I stitch, so don't mind me over here. All right, but for reference, oh my goodness, whoa. That is like much nicer and neater knot, right? Because I wasn't trying to work around the camera. All right, so this is the part that leads up, right? So I know you understand how to satin stitch and how to make it nice and how to make corrections, and just for the sake of being thorough. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start here. Again, outside of the space, right? I know that's really faint, and I apologize. And then I'm going to go to the dot. Now, here's the thing. They did not tell us to do this, but I already knew that trying to eyeball some stuff for me is not going to work. So I made a little notch right there in pencil to tell me about where the center was. Right? So you go from the outside to the inside, 12 o'clock. And about 3 o'clock. And the key point to this part is you're going in that same hole on purpose, right? Deliberately. Okay. I understand that's like more like 255, but you get the point, right? Be precise when you have to be precise. You don't have to be precise, don't worry about it. Like, it's not the end of the world. You can probably fix it. You can fudge it. You know, a little wabi-sabi with it, right? You know, try to make it the best you can, but don't freak out if it's not. Because again, right, anybody who doesn't know anything isn't going to know. And then we go through 9 o'clock. Now, let me just put something real clear here. This is a really small shape. This is going to fill up super fast. Okay. So this is kind of a terrible example, but I didn't want this video to be super, super long and bore you to tears. So we've got our 4 quadrants, right? We have now cut the clock, right, into its little increments. Now, we're going to go over here and cut this in half. And then we're going to cut that new slice that we made in half, and so on. And that's how you would, and then you would just keep working around doing that. So now the other thing that the teacher went over is, okay, so we've gone into the center bit like a bunch of times. And if you keep working into that center, what's going to happen is you're going to run into the risk of pulling too hard and then making a hole. And you probably aren't trying to do that. So at this point, when we go in, we're going to go in like right next to it. And this is kind of where you start to see some of the elements that are built upon here, where you're being a little more mindful about how you're stitching based on what your end result is going to be. You don't want a bunch of holes and tugs and pulls and weird things that divide out. So you know, if it's not perfect, it's not perfect again, right? So I'm gonna stitch right next to it. So that's in half now, right? Okay, so now I'm going to divide this in half. And here's the thing. As you divide stuff in half more and more, there's going to be less space. And so, you know, that's when you start just kind of filling it in a little less precisely. Because you're just really then starting to make sure that you've got the things. Now, I know there's a little bit of a gap here. So that's looking pretty good. There's a space right there, though. These two are pretty close together. So this is where you start doing what is going to lead into painting with the thread, right? Here's another little thing. So this first one, we went not to the center. This one, we went closer to the center, but really to the side of the 12 o'clock. So I'm going to go in between the very center and where that one stopped, because that is going to fill that space in a little better. Now, obviously, this line right here isn't perfect, and that's where you can start to do the correction. So I know that this thread right here needs to have gone a little bit out. So I can fix that by doing that right now. And I hope that you can see this clearly. There's another reason why this isn't public, because if I'm doing a terrible job with my video, then nobody will know but you. Okay. That's a little too close. And so now I've gotten to this part, and I'm going to fill in the next little slice, and that's the middle of that. And oh, I feel like this is open, so I'm going to fill that in. And oh, there's a little gap here. Let me get that. And I'm going to stop here, by the way. I'm not going to make you suffer through all this. And again, see, that is not the center where that needle is. That's right next to the center. But there you go. It's nice and filled in. Now, while there's a tiny gap right here that I could do, and we'll go ahead and do that. And this is gonna make it bulge just a little bit out, and that's okay. It's fine. Pull these. There we go. And so, and that right there. So that's all nice and neat. And then it's kind of covered and obscured this, but as I go around, that would get all fixed. So there you go. Now, so I hope that makes sense, where you start dividing like your shape into pieces, and then you divide those pieces, and then when they get really small, you start to fill in it. And this is really good for circles, right? Or oh my God, can't get this right. They expressed that one of the ways that they would use this is like when doing monograms. So when you get to like an M and you're at that point where you have to go, if you were going like this, you would have this really long float in the back, and it would look really messy. And, you know, for long floats, the problem with them is it's more likely for you to catch, right? This. So they suggest not to do more than an inch float, which is where like a long and short would come up, or where doing this kind of layering would come up, or what we'll do here in just a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and knot this. And mind you, me, like as a teacher, my instruction is actually super precise. And my instructors last night is not, no, you can do it this way, you can do it that way, you can do it this way, or you can do something completely different with it. And that was how they were teaching, which by the way drives my like precise self a little batty, because I want things to look a certain way, and so I expect to do them a certain way. And I understand that not everybody wants to do things like that, and so, right, it's something for everybody. So I'm going to knot this and pull the thread through and all that good stuff. And again, right, we've got this nice pretty knot right there because I took my time. So with this, I'm using this color right here. And then I actually grabbed this color. Not for any particular reason other than I have this whole like, oh my gosh, like these are ends and stuff that I've snipped, or the ends of a hank. And so I'm gonna get this and use this. I already know from using this stuff that it is really pretty, but it's kind of a nightmare to work with. So I may be like giving myself a heart attack and I don't know it yet. That's entirely possible. But that's cool. That's cool. Well, it's a challenge, right? So I've got that already, by the way. I've gotten my 3 strands separated. And the reason that is so terrible is because it has this satiny sheen, so it's super slick. This is all just DMC. So I think it's cotton. All right. So, moment of truth. Now, again, this is a super small space. This is a super small piece. So there's probably not going to be that much of the second color, and that's fine. I'm just trying to communicate how it's done really simply, really quickly. The instructor mentioned that this sort of satin stitching, this hybrid between satin and long and short stitch, is really, it's called thread painting. I think there's another name for it. And it's really good when you need to cover large areas. And so that's another important part, is part of how you're choosing your stitches when it comes to doing satin or something like that, and variations of it, is how big a space are you filling? Are you going to have huge long floats? And with this, right, if we did this, the float would be from here to here. That's like 2 inches, which means if this was on like a piece of fabric that you're wearing, like a piece of clothing, you'd snag it and then it'd pull it out and it would look awful, right? And eventually you do that enough times, you've ruined the design. And that's where doing it little bits and little bits and longer bits and all over the place bits kind of, it has a tendency to blend it, because you have all of these lines overlapping. All right, so another thing about this is when we did the circle, right? The circle started out, in, out, in, out, in, out, in. And then we started going around, but we still were going out, in. This, you can absolutely keep doing that, right? Where you go here and then you go back down and here and then all that. Or you can go here and then here and then here and then here, or here, here, and then here, here. And why it matters is it's going to affect what the back looks like. So this was pretty uniform in the direction that I was going in, which is why it's layered in this way, right? But I kept catching the edge of the fabric and I didn't necessarily pull all the way through. So that's what's going on there. But as you can see, it starts to layer and it starts to cover the stitches because I'm going back over them. So, all right. I'm going to go from the point, right, outside of it. And here's the thing. you could fill this in with regular satin stitch, right? Where you kept it, you know, all even and go up to this imaginary line right here. And then you could do this and you could do the last bit. If you were to do that, what would end up happening is you would have this demarcation line from where you stopped one row and started another. The whole point of stitching like this is to not have any rows like that. If you're doing something that's patterned or where you want to call attention to different sections, having a clear line where it stops and starts is totally fine. But if you're trying to blend things so it looks like a cohesive picture, you don't want to do that. So here, right, I'm going to about the center. I'm going, whoops, a little higher. Oh, I didn't pull it out. Good. Okay, so now I've divided this in half. So now I'm going to divide it again. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Mistakes were made. I don't know what I did. Hold on. Weird thing I did. Pause for technical difficulties. Oops. Yeah, it's super fun to work around a tripod, by the way. Like, super fun. Okay, so there we go. I have fixed this end. I will be back shortly. Sorry about that. Okay. So, all right. So we're going to go over here now, and then we're going to, again, right, outside of the line. Get out of the way, you. So that it gets covered. I don't know what we're doing here. Ha. Okay, and then we're going to go again, right, outside of the line and not quite to that end point, because again, the more you start layering in the same hole, the more of a mess it's going to make later if you pull too hard or whatever. Okay, so right, we've divided this shape now into these pieces. Now I'm going to divide this shape. Now here, I have gotten 3 pretty long lines. This one is a little shorter, but these two are about the same length. So I'm going to put a shorter line over here, right? Okay, and this is where the layering is going to come into play. So I got the shorter line. Okay. Well, you know, let's say I need to fill this in. So I'm going to make another line right here. Maybe not quite as long as this, but not quite as short as this. So there we got this one. Okay, and I'm just going to keep doing this, like back and forth, and, you know, I can fill out over here. I'm going to go a little wider with the, or a little longer with that one. Right, okay, so now I want to go over here and get this one a little wider over here too. All right, oh, well, there's a smaller piece I'd like to do, not there, right about here. Okay. So you see, it has the elements of long and short, where some of the stitches are longer and some of the stitches are shorter, right? But it's not sequential right next to each other. And then over, and then over, and then over. It's not like that. It's like here and here and here, and okay, a little bit over here and a little bit over here. So let's say I'm going to fill in right here, and then we're done with this color. So, okay. And I'm going to be super lazy, and I'm not going to like tie this off. We're just going to pretend that I did that, okay? because I want to get through this. I'm going to go into our next color, which is this shiny blue. I think that knotting this way is also going to be really good for like super fussy threads like this guy. Because this thing is it's super slick, and so tying a knot in threads that are super slick or shiny or what have you is not like the most fun thing to do with your time. And so this is a really easy way to get a nice, ha! Bam! Nice neat knot. Yeah. Okay, so fun part. This is where the whole painting becomes, I feel like, a little more obvious. So here's these stitches that we've done. Some longs, some shorts, in different directions, in different places. Because I tried to keep it in the same spaces, it's relatively neat in the back. Okay, so when you start adding another color, right, you can start at the end of a stitch, right, these ends, or you can start a little bit below it, or off to the side. And where you start is where you start. You don't have to start in the middle like you started here, right? One thing I would say is I would be careful not to split some of the threads. That can just make a mess, okay? Right, and we're just going to assume that we're going to finish this off with this one color, right? Seems legit. So, right, you see how this thread is between these two threads, and it's not on top of a stitch, and it's not splitting either of these groups of thread. Okay, now there is a little gap here, right? So I could have gone a little further down. So we'll address that, but we'll go over here first. Okay, so there's a spot right here. I'm going to go a little lower than that. Okay, and then, oh, there's a spot here. And so you just, you assess, right? You assess based on what you're seeing, what you're looking at. It looks like I pulled through something, so let me go ahead and fix that. And that's from me not knotting it. That's what that is. And so as you can see, right, I'm going really close to that thread, and I partially covered it a little bit. And that's how it blends, right? You're not keeping it super neat per se. And now I'm going to come over here. And again, it's a little haphazard, it's a little wonky, but you're doing things in layers. And that's how it looks when you layer stuff. If you look at it in the middle of you doing it, it may not look like much. Or it may not look super attractive because it's not done yet. Okay, so I'm going to do a shorter stitch here. All right. And maybe I'll do another shorter one over here. Okay. And, oh, you know, I feel like doing a longer one right here. And so this is about at the end of the stitch that I'm going from the previous color. Okay, and you see, because I went from the direct end, there's a little gap right here that the tip of the needle can fit in. And that's why you want to layer things and overlap them, because so instead of going right here, right, I'm going to go a little bit below it and off to the side. So I try not to split the thread too much. Oh. And this is really tiny, so this is not the easiest thing for me to do. Okay, so now I'm gonna go over here because I feel like this little gap over here is bothering me. All right, so now you see that gap is pretty much gone. But there's like another little piece over here that could get some love. And so I'm gonna go over here now. And now I'm gonna go not right there, but right there and fill that in. It looks like a little weird balloon, right? All right, now I feel like going over here. I'm gonna go quite there. I'm gonna go here. Oops, sorry. And so you see how this is blending the new threads into the previous threads, right? So some of the color is disappearing a little bit from the very tops. And you know what? I want to go from top to bottom now, okay? And you can do that. You know, this kind of looks like a weird little flower now, right? So this is that greenish. It's like the stems or whatever. There's a word. There's a botanical word. I don't know what it is, but it's the green part before the leaves start. Okay, so as you can see, this is mostly filled in, and there's this kind of like little blending because some of these colors are way up here, some of this color is way down here. I see another gap that I don't love, so I'm gonna try and fill that in. Oh, or not, you know, or I'm gonna stop for a minute. So I will grab that and put that down there. But I hope it's clear. Like there's a gap here, so I can fill that in. And this one, maybe I will use a shorter stitch from about here to here. And so you don't have this long stitch traveling up all here. And I'll get this, and maybe get this, and maybe get over here. And so I hope that's really clear, how those look different and how they're formed and how they're similar but different from one another. I know this video was kind of long, and my apologies. If you have any questions, you can just send it to me in Messenger if you want. I'll get to it a lot faster than if you put it here. But I hope that's clear and makes sense, and I didn't burden you with too much unnecessary, oh, I already knew that stuff. And enjoy! Happy stitching!